What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Week 11 NFL Summary episode. We got a lot of good games this week, and we knew that going in. A lot of high-profile matchups. We got the Bucks and Bills, which didn't disappoint. Got the Chiefs and Broncos, which we will talk about a little bit later. We got the Eagles and Lions on Sunday Night Football. But to me, the game of the week, and potentially one of the best matchups of the year, we talked about it last week, was the Seahawks and Rams. And I mentioned last week when I was previewing this, when I was talking about the NFC West division, I said that we're going to get this first matchup, and I don't want to overreact to 1 week. I said, depending on the results, I'm not going to just overreact and say whoever wins is clearly the better team. I'm not going to now just sit here and say the Rams are clearly better, the Seahawks are done. I think this was more likely to be the first round in what could be a 3-round matchup between these two teams. They play once more later on this year. They could potentially play in the playoffs as well. And my takeaway from the game, and we'll get to what I really want to talk about in a second, but my overall takeaway from the game is these are two of the best teams in the league. I think both the Rams and the Seahawks showed they are the two of the best teams in the league. There are some others in the NFC you could talk about. You could bring up the Eagles, the Lions, maybe Buccaneers, 49ers if they're healthy, somebody else from the NFC North. But I think right now it's the Seahawks and Rams. I think those are the two teams right now that are playing the best and are the most complete teams. That doesn't mean they're without their flaws, and that doesn't mean that I think these are two shoo-ins for the NFC Championship game. I think my other takeaway from this game is if you take everything but quarterback, I think the Seahawks outplayed the Rams. And I think that is a good sign for the Seahawks, but it's also a bad sign because at the end of the day, and I think that's a good sign for the Seahawks, but at the end of the day, that's also a bad sign because really what matters is your quarterback. And while Matthew Stafford didn't have a great game, certainly not a great game by his standards, I thought the Seahawks defense did a lot of things this game that maybe some teams can draw on. Obviously, it's hard when you don't have the Seahawks personnel. But Stafford had a down game, but was still solid, didn't make too many mistakes. And then you look on the flip side, and that was just not the case for Sam Darnold. 4 interceptions, moved the ball at times, and at least at the end of the game, was able to get a touchdown drive, was able to get them at least semi and field goal range to potentially win it. So it wasn't all bad for Darnold, but that's the big contrast from these teams, is the whole roster, you could kind of put it up in the air. You could say the Seahawks, I think they outplayed the Rams this week. As I said in the beginning, I'm not going to just make up statements just based on one game. But the rosters outside of quarterback are pretty even. And I think two of the best rosters in the whole NFL. And I think that's where I have more questions on the Seahawks team. The Rams are great, and they have Stafford, who has been great. A little bit of a down week, but I trust him more. The Seahawks are where more people are going to have questions. And I think that's where a lot of people are going to come to the conclusion, as good as the Seahawks team looks, are they just a replica of last year's Vikings? And so that's what I want to kind of look at. The Vikings, if you remember last year, obviously led by Sam Darnold, were a really great regular season team. They ended 14-3. If you remember, they started 14-2, had a big Sunday night game against Detroit to be the 1 seed. That obviously didn't go well for Sam Darnold, didn't go well for the Vikings. Then their one playoff game against the Rams also didn't go well. So this really great Vikings team last year had their 2 worst games at the end of the year when it counted and looked so bad that it pretty much just discounted everything they did. And I think that's where people are maybe leaning for the Seahawks team. And you can see the similarities. Obviously, the big similarity is they have the same quarterback. Sam Darnold, as great as he looked this year, as great as he looked for the majority of last year, everyone still has concerns that the old Sam Darnold will come up when it matters. That's obviously a similarity. But I think on the flip side, as much as everyone wants to say, oh yeah, is the bad Sam Darnold going to show up? Well, the good Sam Darnold showed up for a lot of last year. The Vikings finished 6th in passing yards. The Seahawks right now are 4th in passing yards per game. And if you ignore the last 2 games last year, if you ignore this game, Sam Darnold has been playing like a top 5 quarterback. He's putting up the stats. He's passing the eye test. It's not like these are just kind of cheap stats that he's putting up. He looks good. And I think this year he might even look better than he did last year. So when it was right, both the Vikings and Seahawks had this great passing attack. Sam Darnold looked great. The Vikings receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, one of the best receiving cores in the league. The Seahawks team in 25, a lot of people thought it wasn't going to be the case, but now Jackson Smith and Jigba is potentially the best receiver in the game. They also have a big-time passing attack. Seahawks, as I mentioned, 4th in passing yards. And so both offenses were led by Sam Darnold and led by this passing attack with maybe somewhat disappointing rushing attacks. Last year, the Vikings finished 19th in rushing yards per game. You would expect a little bit more. Aaron Jones was fully healthy throughout last season. The Vikings offensive line obviously played a part in that as well. But rushing attack was almost just kind of supporting Sam Darnold and the passing offense. And I think that's kind of the same thing this year. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, you would think 2 good running backs would have the Seahawks in a really good rushing position, but they're only 14th in rushing. And I think a lot of people have this idea that the Seahawks are just this great rushing team. Sam Darnold, a lot of play action off of that. In reality, it's almost the opposite. It's still a lot of play action, but the play action is almost setting up the run. And so this is still maybe a run-heavy system, but the Seahawks just aren't running it with the success that they want. And so that is another similarity. Sam Darnold and this passing offense kind of leading this team at least through the regular season. And then on the other side of the ball, Seahawks, as I mentioned, I think have one of the best defenses in the league. Vikings last year also had one of the best defenses in the league. And so you can see where a lot of the similarities are. This great offense, specifically great passing offense, led by Sam Darnold, who a lot of people have question marks when it matters. They both are led by great defenses. And that basically tells the story. These great teams in the regular season led by a quarterback that has a lot of question marks come playoff time. And so it makes sense. If you think the Seahawks in 25 are similar to the Vikings in 24, the only thing I would push back on, and the only thing I would make the argument that the Seahawks team isn't going to be the same Vikings team from last year. The argument I would make that maybe the Seahawks will have a different path, a different conclusion than the Vikings team last year, is basically centered around how Sam Darnold is going to do. Because right, at the end of the day, how your quarterback does really matters, and how your quarterback does in key situation really matters. Yes, Darnold threw 4 interceptions. If you look at them, they were all his fault. I'm not trying to say otherwise. But I think the first 3 interceptions were really just him trying to do a little bit too much. And the Seahawks passing offense that has looked great to start the year, Darnold, Jackson Smith and Jigba, this whole offense has been really successful because of their big plays and because of their ability to push the ball down the field. And a lot of that has been Darnold. Darnold has been great throwing the deep ball this year. And the first 3 interceptions just looked like he was forcing a little bit too much. Like he really wanted to make some plays that just weren't there. Whether it was the first one, trying to fit it into Cooper Kupp, even if the safety doesn't come across the middle, that's still a very tight throw that probably doesn't get completed. And that was the theme for the first 3 interceptions to me. The worry is that those 3 kind of set up the 4th one. And I think the 4th one was the more concerning one because he just wasn't trusting what he was seeing. I think the 4th one, he had open guys, and whether it was the first 3 interceptions, whether it was something else, he just wasn't trusting himself, and that is the more concerning interception. And so that Sam Darnold that you see, if the Seahawks get that, it's going to be a problem. And it's going to be a problem at least come, playoff time or playing good teams. The first 3 interceptions, though, I think are fixable. And I'm sure Darnold and the coaching staff are going to look at those 3 interceptions and say, okay, this is fixable. I was trying to do a little bit too much. If I just stay within the offense, stay within myself, we're going to be okay. And in the times they did, they were able to move the ball somewhat consistently against the Rams. So that Sam Darnold, that is going to be the difference. Can the Seahawks get that Darnold out of him? If they can, I think the Seahawks team has a way higher ceiling than the Vikings team last year. And I think there's reason for optimism, despite Darnold having 4 interceptions. The biggest reason for optimism is the Seahawks offensive line is way different than the Vikings offensive line. That was a lot of the problems last year, especially when it kind of fell apart for the Vikings, was their offensive line. Darnold was sacked 9 times in their playoff game against the Rams. Right now, if you could guess who had the least amount of sacks given up in the NFL, you probably wouldn't guess the Seahawks. You see Sam Darnold, you see the Seahawks just typically have bad offensive lines. But right now, the Seahawks have only given up 10 sacks. And that, I think, is something that is going to help Sam Darnold and help this offense when it really matters. And that, I think, is something that the Vikings didn't have. The Vikings, when it mattered, some of it was due to injury, so I don't want to totally blame them. But when it mattered, the Vikings offensive line just couldn't hold up, and Darnold is not good enough to kind of mask those flaws. In the 25 Seahawks, I'm not saying the Seahawks offensive line is the best in football. I wouldn't even argue if it's, top 5, maybe top 10. But it's, I think, an above average offensive line, as long as they can stay healthy. So an above average offensive line with a Sam Darnold that has probably learned from last year, has learned from this past game, that is a reason for optimism for the Seahawks. That is the reason to say, okay, yes, this Seahawks team is not like the 24 Vikings. They have a higher ceiling. I'm not saying they're going to get there, but I did see signs where this could end differently for the Seahawks. And if you're a Seahawks fan like myself, obviously we hope that's the case, but it's going to have to fall on Darnold in this offense, recognizing where they went wrong and being able to fix it. And I think they have a better chance of fixing it than the Vikings did last year. That's where it's going to be different. If they don't, I think we're going to see a similar result to last year for the Vikings, but I think there's the potential for more. And so I will leave it at that. A great game. Two of the best teams, as I mentioned. We're going to get round 2 later. We'll certainly talk about that when we get to it. The other big storyline from this week is the Kansas City Chiefs. And another great game we had in the late window, Chiefs-Broncos. Everyone before the game pretty much said it was a foregone conclusion. The Chiefs were going to win. Not because they were necessarily better, but because the Chiefs really needed to win this game. And I know they were on the road against one of the better teams in the AFC in the Broncos. So it wasn't going to be an easy game, but these are the games that the Chiefs usually win. When their backs are pushed against the wall, maybe some people are starting to doubt them. These are the game that the Chiefs usually win. And it kind of went like to be expected, kind of a slow start. Chiefs right in it when it mattered, lead in the fourth quarter. Mahomes ended up getting the ball, and yet the Chiefs didn't pull it out. And I think now is when we can really start to panic if you're the Chiefs. They are now 5-5, 9th in the AFC after some tiebreakers. And the concerning part is the teams right above them, they've all lost to. The Jaguars right now are the 7th seed. They beat the Chiefs. The Chargers are the 6th seed. They beat the Chiefs. And the Bills are the 5th seed. And they beat the Chiefs. And so if you want to make the argument that, yeah, the Chiefs record, doesn't put them in the playoffs, but they're better than some of the teams that will make it. At some point, you are what your record says you are, and you've lost to the teams right above you. So at some point, it makes sense that you are right now out of the playoffs. They obviously do still control their own destiny. They play the Chargers and Broncos again. They play the Colts, who are in the playoffs right now. So they're going to have some time to fix what's wrong with them, to try and pull some of these games out, get into the playoffs. The problem is they are now in almost do or die mode. I don't want to say every game is a must win, but when you're 5-5, there's only so many losses you have left. Because when you look at the playoff picture, the Patriots, the Bills, I think those are 2 locks. One's going to win the division. One's going to be a wild card. The Colts are pretty much a lock. I would say the Broncos are probably a lock right now. Most likely for the division. If for some reason the Chargers catch them, maybe they get a wild card. But I think those are 4 locks. The Steelers and the Ravens, one of them is going to win the division. I've said in the past, I think it's going to be the Ravens, but one of those you could lock. So that's 5 teams that I already mentioned. So you only got 2 left. And it's going to come down to the Jaguars, the Chargers, the Texans, the Chiefs, and then I'll say the Steelers, but either the Steelers or Ravens. So that's a lot of teams for only 2 spots. And so 3 of those teams aren't going to make it. And the Chiefs, as I mentioned, they control their own destiny, but they also have a decently hard schedule left. And if they lose a couple of those games, I think it's over. Because, you could make the case of the teams I mentioned, Jaguars, despite how good they look this week, would probably be one of my picks to fall out of the playoffs. But they play the Titans, the Jets, the Cardinals, and the Titans again. And so those are 4, I don't want to just give them those wins, but those are 4 pretty easy games. And if they win all those 4, they're at 10 wins. And so suddenly it's just a math game for the Chiefs. Can they get enough wins? Can some of these teams get enough losses? It's still early, so it's not like total panic time in terms of, you're relying on other teams' performances, but we're like right up at that point. And probably one more loss puts the Chiefs in a mode where they're just not used to. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the Chiefs and what's gone wrong and, why they're 5-5 and all of that. The only thing that I'll say is last year, obviously the Chiefs were the 1 seed, they were 15-2, but everyone made the point that the Chiefs' win-loss record that was expected compared to what they actually got was way different. As I said, they were 15-2 based on, I think it's based on points both scored and given up. Their expected win-loss record was right around 10-7. And that is way different from 15-2. Now, some of that was week 18. They lost 38-0. That's when all the backups played. So that obviously played a factor. But if you kind of take that away and assume that the Chiefs' expected win-loss was maybe 11-6, that's way different than 15-2. That's a 4-win difference. And I've said across a lot of sports, when you have, a one-score game record that is as good as the Chiefs, or for other sports like baseball, one-run game win-loss record, when you consistently have really good records in those situations, I think that it's not just luck. I do think that's the team. And I think at some level, the Chiefs have been like that. They have the experience, they have Mahomes, they have Andy Reid. And so I don't think it's totally luck. I think some of that you have to give Chiefs credit. But at some point, it is just luck. And some of that, you're going to have good years like last year, where you're just pulling out all those games. And then you're going to have seasons like this, where you're just not pulling out games. And I don't think the Chiefs are just suddenly bad. Their 5 losses have been by a total of 23 points. So it's not like they're getting blown out. They've been in all these games. They're just not pulling it out when it matters. And, you could point to a lot of different things. Their defense, while still good, I don't think as elite as they've been in the last couple of years. And then this offense, Patrick Mahomes, again, I don't want to go into a whole thing on Mahomes and the Chiefs. He looked better to start the year, and I think he's looked better overall than he has the last couple of years. But we're not getting the elite Patrick Mahomes we've gotten. And it's been a few years since we've seen that. But I think MVP Mahomes covers up all the other flaws that the Chiefs had, both had and have now. And I think the difference is Mahomes is just not playing at that level. He's not a bad quarterback. I still think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But if he's not being able to be, MVP level Mahomes, where he's covering up all these flaws, you're going to have seasons like this, where you're pretty good, you're in the mix, but you're losing a lot of these games because you don't have Mahomes to just save you every single time. And I think that's part of the problem for the Chiefs. So we're going to see where they end up. We're going to talk about them, obviously, throughout the season. We'll probably check in throughout some of these weeks to see, are they actually in danger of missing the playoffs? Right now, gun to my head, I still think they make it, but this is the first week where I'm really considering that they don't. And that's crazy to think about based on just how they've been, but all teams struggle, all dynasties fall at some point. Not saying this is the case, but it happens to the best of them. Let's finish out the weekly summary, hitting on just some other games. Let's go through my winners and losers really quick. One winner for me, we talked about this Rams-Seahawks game a lot. One winner is Cameron Kitchens, who had 2 more interceptions against the Seahawks this week. He has 6 career interceptions. 4 of them are against the Seahawks. He's only been in the league 2 years. He had 2 interceptions last year as a rookie, 2 again this year. I'm not going to draw any conclusions. They were 2 different quarterbacks. One was Geno, one was Sam Darnold. It's a division game. Maybe he comes up for it. Maybe it's random, but he gets the win and gets 2 interceptions. So he's a winner for the week. Another winner, sort of surprise winner, was Sean Tucker, the running back for the Buccaneers. Rashad White is still there, but obviously Bucky Irving has missed a good part of the last month or so. And Sean Tucker has kind of always been the third guy in Tampa Bay. Doesn't really get a lot of run. But when he is needed and when he gets run, he's actually looked pretty good. He's had his moments the last couple of years, and he ends up going over 100 yards, a couple touchdowns against the Bills defense that is a little shaky. And we'll talk about the Bills in a second. But Sean Tucker, winner for me this week. And then my last winner is Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett is putting together a season we potentially have never seen. He's up to 15 sacks on the year. That's pretty much all the last 3 weeks. And if you remember back to my midseason episode, I said there wasn't really a big favorite for Defensive Player of the Year at that time. I ended up picking Myles Garrett because he was close to the leader in sacks. I still think he's the best defensive player in the league, but there wasn't a runaway favorite. And now, 3 weeks later, Myles Garrett has just gone on a tear. He's put 10 sacks in the last 3 weeks, 5 a few weeks ago, 1 last week, and then 4 against Baltimore this week. I'm not really sure what Myles Garrett wants. He might be someone that just wants to stay in Cleveland, wants to stay in one organization for his career. But I really hope that he gets traded somewhere this offseason, because I don't really trust Cleveland to be really a contender next year. So at a minimum, we're probably 2 years away from Cleveland competing. And at that point, who knows what Myles Garrett is going to be. I really hope that he gets traded to a contender this offseason. I really hope we can see him in meaningful games, because he's going to go down as one of the best pass rushers ever. And, we can have that conversation another time on where he's going to rank all time. But he's consistently putting up great seasons and potentially having his best one this year. So big winner for me is Myles Garrett, despite being on a really bad team. The 3 losers for me, one is Justin Herbert. I don't want to say Justin Herbert is a loser because of his play. And I still think he's been a really good quarterback this year. To me, he's a loser because I just feel bad for him. He has struggled with injuries the last couple of years, even if he's played a majority of the games. He's just struggled with one thing after another. He's struggled with coaching and just overall Chargers organization. Last year, a little bit different. Jim Harbaugh comes in. Chargers look like they're headed on an upward trajectory. This year starts out great. He's healthy. Chargers look like they're going to be really good. And yet, he loses his left tackle in training camp or in preseason. He loses his right tackle first at the first part of the year, then he comes back, and then he loses him again. He loses his top running back, or really his top 2 running backs, down to 3rd, 4th string running backs. And so what could have been kind of Justin Herbert's coming out party has now settled to more of what we've expected from the Chargers and more of what we've expected from Herbert. He's going to make plays. He's still going to look good. But because he just doesn't have enough around him, we're going to have weeks like this where Chargers don't look good. He doesn't look great. And I honestly just feel bad for him. So loser of the week is Justin Herbert. Next loser for me is Jonathan Gannon. I don't know if the Cardinals are going to keep Gannon, but right now it's very clear that the Cardinals are 4th in their division. And they're in a tough division. Rams, Seahawks, I mentioned, 2 of the best teams in the league. 49ers right behind them, and I'm sure 49ers fans would say they deserve to be in that conversation as well. In some order, it's those 3, and the Cardinals are clearly 4th. They got blown out by the Seahawks last week, got blown out by the 49ers this week. You thought it was Kyler Murray we could blame. Jacoby Brissett hasn't looked great, although he did set the completion record this week. But the Cardinals just overall haven't been competitive without Kyler. They haven't really been competitive with Kyler. So it's not really the quarterback. You could say it's the roster. They don't have a great roster. They don't have a terrible roster, but just given the division they're in, it's not a great roster. And so I think all of that to say it's going to come down on Jonathan Gannon. So I don't know if that's deserving. Don't quite know yet if he's going to be a good coach. But with the division they're in, with kind of what he's facing, he might end up getting let go, even if it's not his fault. So unfortunate to say, Jonathan Gannon, one loser for me this week. And then the last loser is the Atlanta Falcons. Just the whole team. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to say Michael Penix, who looks to be a season-ending injury. That's not a good sign for him, but we can talk about that later. I was going to say Raheem Morris, similar to Jonathan Gannon. He might be let go because of all of this. I was going to say the Atlanta GM, because they are now 3-7, and they traded their first-round pick last year to the Rams for what ended up being James Pierce. As others have mentioned, I don't think that's as bad of a trade as people make it out to be. I think James Pierce has looked pretty good. Atlanta has a good pass rush. Having someone like that, is worthy of a first round pick. And so they don't have the one this year. They got 2 last year, kind of ended up working out to be the same. Obviously, if that pick becomes a top 5 pick, it's not great. So that's part of the reason why the Falcons to me are just all losers. Coach, quarterback, organization, whatever you want to say, just not a good week for the Falcons, on top of blowing a lead to a division rival. And then let's get through my weekly awards. MVP this week is Josh Allen, 6 touchdowns. They mentioned on the broadcast that's only happened 2 other times, 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns. One of them was Josh Allen a couple years ago, and the other was Otto Graham. You could make the case, and I said this a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of debate for MVP. It could be that just one of these top quarterbacks that we think would have won MVP at the beginning of the year is going to start to take over. It's not going to be Mahomes. It's not going to be Lamar Jackson. It could be that this is the beginning of Josh Allen, reminding us he's the MVP. My surprise player of the week is Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy is a good quarterback, so I wasn't surprised by that. But I thought after missing a month that might be a little bit slow, might take him a little bit to get back up to speed, but he looked great. And obviously it doesn't hurt to have Christian McCaffrey, to have George Kittle, but he looks good. The 49ers, as I said a little bit ago, they want to make sure they're in the conversation too with the Seahawks and Rams. I think just with everybody they've lost, they're still a step below, but the 49ers looked good this week. My disappointing player is JJ McCarthy. I don't want to really spend that much time on him. He was really bad. He missed some time. He looked pretty good when he came back against Detroit a couple weeks ago. He was my surprise player of the week then. But now these is back-to-back games where he just hasn't looked good. And I don't want to write him off yet. As I said before, he's young. This is his rookie year. I'm going to wait a little bit to get to that point, but it hasn't looked great for JJ McCarthy. Best team, at least this week, I'm not saying they're the best team in the league, but best team has to go to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who won, I think, 35-6 against the Chargers. This seemed to be the first week where we really got to see what Liam Cohen wants the Jaguars to be, and specifically the Jaguars offense. I was really hard on Trevor Lawrence last week. This week, honestly, just doesn't change my opinion. Thought he was good. I thought he didn't really have to do too much. A lot of it was the running game. A lot of it was, again, what Liam Cohen wants this offense to look like. And they're the 7 seed. I said before, they have a really easy schedule. So not out of the realm of possibility the Jaguars make a little playoff run, which might be surprising to some, but they looked good this week. And then let's finish up with my surprise team and my disappointing team, which is coming from the same game. Surprise team is the Carolina Panthers. Disappointing team, the Atlanta Falcons. I talked about the Falcons earlier. Not only losing Penix, the first round pick that they traded, now falling to 3-7, blowing a lead against the Panthers. It's clear why they're the disappointing team of the week. The Panthers are the surprise team because I don't really know what to think of them. They're, I think, a half game now behind the Buccaneers. So they really could make a playoff push. And yet I don't think they're a good team. And so I don't really know what to think of them. But they're stacking wins, and it's hard to win in the NFL, so I have to give them credit. Bryce Young looked really good. He always looks good against Atlanta. Again, I don't know if he's a good NFL quarterback, but he has games like this where I start to believe. And I think for where he's at and where the Panthers are at, that's as much as you could ask for. So Panthers are the surprise team, Falcons disappointing team this week. And that is going to wrap up week 11 in the NFL. Lots of good games this week. Lots of good storylines, as always. If you liked this content, if you want to see more, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for every NFL week. We go through a summary like this every Tuesday. NBA episodes similar to this come out every Friday. So subscribe, stay tuned for that, and we will see you in the next video.